Good morning, another warm welcome. Thanks for joining us, and if you're joining us online, please say hello in the chat. It's really great for us to be together. My name's Sam, and just want to extend a warm welcome to what's going to be our whole summer program now here at New Life Church, and I'm really excited to be kicking that off today. Not only have we got, I think, some really great messages and speakers lined up, they even asked me to do some as well, which is always makes me very happy. But also we got some really cool socials that James was just telling us about, and great opportunities just to invite other people along to. And doesn't the stage look awesome? I can't take any credit for it, but a big thanks to Ali for putting this together, and we're really looking forward to sharing our summer together over the next few weeks here at New Life Church. Now, it may not be that you've quite tipped into this, but for our house it definitely is now officially the start of the summer holidays. So if you work in schools or provision for young people, or if you've just on your break now, you can start to think about all that's to come over the next sort of 6 weeks. And if you're anything like us, we've just got through the last sort of mad few weeks of end of school plays and leavers assemblies and goodness knows how many other activities, and suddenly arrived at the beginning of the holidays and thinking, we better plan something. This is quite a long time. So I was thinking about the sort of things I used to do in my summer holidays, usually involved out on my bike, going to play tennis, or long games of football until it was so dark you could barely see anything, just to make the most of those last few moments of summer warm evenings and summer light. But maybe you've got some things planned going away. Maybe it's a trip to the cinema or the seaside. We're going to be following through some of these summer activities through our new series. Now, think about Jesus. When he was a young man, he had his carpentry apprenticeship with his father, and as he came to the end of that and started his sort of ministry, him and his team sort of went on tour around the region of Israel, and they got up to all kinds of different activities and adventures. Some of them were speaking to large groups of people, often meeting unlikely individuals along the way, sometimes rubbing shoulders and tense exchanges with the religious leaders of the day. But all of these, or many of these stories, were captured by some of his followers. You may have heard of them before, most likely Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. They wrote down their observations and their memories of these different encounters that Jesus had through his life and his ministry. And so they form the first few books of the New Testament within the Bible as they were put together. But they really are written from either their eyewitness accounts, or particularly in the case of Luke, he was commissioned to go and research and investigate into the life of Jesus. And in fact, we did a series on that that you can look up on our YouTube channel a few months ago, Investigating Jesus. Really encourage you to go and look at that. But when you read these stories, they're not just parables or made-up tales to illustrate a point. Actually, I really think we can have a lot of trust in the records of these actual events that they saw, that they experienced, because there's so many practical details that you think, well, you'd never record that if you're just trying to illustrate some kind of point. And also in a lot of these stories, they often reflect somewhat poorly on the people who are writing the stories, and Jesus' disciples. They don't always come across in the greatest way possible. I'm sure if you wanted to write an autobiography of your life, you'd cover all sorts of things, maybe lots of things that happened to you, but perhaps people aren't usually always inclined to cover all of the sort of mistakes and misunderstandings that they've had along the way. So over the next 5 Sundays, we're going to be looking at different stories from those accounts of Jesus doing what might be different sort of summer activities that we could imagine. So today we're going to be looking at Jesus having a day in the park with his disciples and rather quite a few number of other people as well. But we're going to be looking at what does it mean for us if we say that we're Jesus followers. What lessons of faith can we find in these stories, and what moments of hope can we discover as we look back across these, as Jesus went around often teaching to the crowds, but also ministering to people, encountering different people along his way. So we want to invite you to join us on this summer journey through these activities. So I was just thinking, well, if I was going to have a day at the park, what sort of things would I pack to bring along? So obviously my trusty rucksack, goes without saying, a nice cozy rug. You never know if the ground is dry. Obviously the thermos, because we always love a nice hot cup of tea. No matter how hot it gets, a cup of tea is good. And obviously I forgot the emergency tea bags, but they would definitely need to be in there. Now, we also have a small 4-legged friend, so we definitely remember his lead. And I might not explain too much what these are for, but definitely essential for the trip out to the park. Now, of course, the standard tennis ball, not only for the dog to chase, but can be used to throw between us. And of course, for any English day out, what else could you need but the raincoats? Yes, because we all know summer wouldn't be complete without a good rain shower. But then we might also dig out, as I did this morning, what could be a somewhat damaged kite from under the bed, hoping that it can resurrect and relive its glory days as we try and fly it around the park, usually with no wind whatsoever. But as well as all these things, we definitely want to bring our hamper of food, because there's nothing like a day out in the park to give us an appetite, particularly with the kids running around and getting hungry. And so in today's story that we're going to look at is a time with Jesus with his followers when they definitely could have done with a few food hampers. Now, maybe in your hamper, I wonder what you go for. Maybe you're into the sort of pre-made sandwiches, bringing those along. And certainly when I was little, we'd always had, there was a lot of us when we went on holiday. And so it was always old ice cream tubs full of cold sausages and chicken used to get passed round. And I was the youngest, so they always ended up coming to me last, so to see what everyone else didn't want, especially when it came to crisps. I have to say, the multi-pack crisps, the only ones I really liked was prawn cocktail, and sadly by the time the bag got round to me, there's usually only cheese and onion, which I like them now, but no, it's not good then. So maybe you go for that, or maybe a bit more sophisticated, a bit more continental, like sort of salads, a baguette, olives, maybe even some hummus. But we'll see what's in here in a little while. As I said, we're going to be looking at a story when Jesus didn't have quite such a sophisticated selection of foods, but him and his followers definitely needed some of that. You may have guessed already, but we're going to be looking at a story that's often called Jesus feeding the 5,000, or feeding the multitude, or the story of the loaves and the fishes. Now, it must have been quite a memorable moment, because aside from the resurrection of Jesus, it's the only miraculous story that all 4 gospel writers actually record. And we're going to look at the account from the book of John in chapter 6. And so we're going to just work through this story. And it begins like this. It says, sometime after this, which kind of leads us to think, well, sometime after what? So if we read the previous chapters and if we look at the other accounts, basically the scene is that Jesus has been traveling around with his disciples, and he's been generally speaking to ever-growing crowds of people. So he's been teaching often all day long, often healing the sick, and so it's been definitely a busy time. And so it carries on with a bit more detail. After this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee. So a bit of context here. We think that Jesus had been teaching around Capernaum, and so to travel across to the other side of the Sea of Galilee would have been about 4 miles. So the context is they're getting on a boat to sail across. And reading some of the other stories, we understand a bit more that really they're trying to escape some of the crowds. It's been a heavy going time, and they want to retreat to somewhere nice and quiet and calm and get away from things. Now, it doesn't seem quite that easy because the crowds obviously can see where they're headed to. And across the Sea of Galilee, they're going to be heading for this town called Bethsaida. And so there's not many places where they can dock. So the rest of the crowd are obviously thinking, well, we can get a bit more action here. So they set off on foot, predicting where their boat's going to land. Obviously hungry to hear more and to see more of what Jesus is doing. And so they come to this clearing somewhere over this side of the sea with some kind of grassy plain, which is our park, our setting for our scene today. And so it carries on in the record, and it says, and a great crowd of people followed him. Well, why? Because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. So there's signs and wonders going on. There's something happening that people are attracted to, and they want to follow and find out and witness and experience more. We don't know whether they were motivated by a sort of sense of faith or drawn to that, or whether it was just the spectacle, or whether it was just this is what was happening and they just wanted to be one of the crowd to say they were there and they were there in that moment. And so it carries on in the record, and it says, then Jesus went up to a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. And it also tells us in John's account only that the Jewish Passover festival was near. So the Jewish Passover was a really huge, significant festival for the Jewish people, and it would have meant the roads would have been ever busier with travellers coming in to join up together for this festival. And so we can imagine that even the normal crowds that would have been following Jesus were probably swelling even more. And as people were travelling into that region, they see groups of people heading over to find Jesus. It's not too much to expect that they were probably joining in and wanting to see what was going on. So, what's going to happen now? Well, we move on, and it says this. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, I mean, it's probably initially, obviously it doesn't say this, but thinking, I thought we got away from these guys, But he sees them and he says to Philip, where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? So it's clearly, probably towards the end of a long day already. And Jesus is looking out and seeing there's literally thousands of people coming towards him, coming to listen to him. And so he says to Philip, now a bit about Philip. We understand from reading around a bit more of the other accounts that Philip was probably from this town of Bethsaida. So he may well have had some local knowledge. And so Jesus turns to him and asks him this question. But there's a bit of insight that John captures for us. And he says this, that he asked this only to test him, as in Jesus had asked this, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. So there's a little bit of a sneaky question he springs upon Philip. Obviously, Philip doesn't know that this is what's going on. So Philip answers him, it would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. Now we're just going to unpack this a little bit. You see, Philip, I think, he's a pretty switched on guy. I mean, he's already assessed the situation. He's the logistics guy, and he's looking at this and thinking, well, the first problem with this plan, Jesus, is that we just don't have enough money. I mean, when you look at all these people, and he's obviously done some quick maths to buy enough bread, even for a bite for each of these people, we're going to need a huge amount of resources. I mean, just look at us. We are not carrying that kind of money with us. And we're certainly not in any position to be getting loans. So how on earth are we even going to pay for all this food? But not only that, even if you come up with some clever answer, Jesus, there's another very practical problem with this proposal. Is that even if we had this money, where on earth are we going to buy all of this bread? There's no giant supermarkets or wholesalers nearby. We don't have friends who truck drivers for bread companies are going to drop off a whole load. You know, even if we had the money, we can't possibly obtain all this bread to feed even just a minimal amount to those who are gathered here. And so Philip's logical conclusion, which I don't think is unreasonable, is this is crazy. This is a hopeless situation. You know, this guy, Jesus, it's all very well just saying, let's just feed everyone, guys. You know, this is completely impractical. He's just a dreamer. Like, we can't even do this. We're going to have some kind of plan B, some alternative way to get out of that. And I think if we're honest, as followers of Jesus, when he calls us to a certain mission, when we see a certain need, it's very easy for us to look at it and think, it's too big. This need is too great. I don't have the resources to meet this. This is some kind of crazy idea of the mission that we're being called to. And maybe we're starting to think about, well, there's going to have to be some kind of plan B. I mean, we read about it in the stories throughout the Bible of God calling people, and they look at themselves and think, I'm too small, I can't speak well enough, I don't have the resources, I'm not well connected enough. God, you're going to have to pick someone else because something's gone wrong here, and you can't possibly be choosing or calling me. And we can be very smart at calculating the limits of what we can achieve ourselves. And we quickly conclude that God's mission, his call to us, is way beyond what we can do. And therefore, this just ain't possible. I mean, this guy's just a dreamer. Well, let's carry on the story because we meet some other interesting characters who have a slightly different view and attitude. Enter Andrew. So the story carries on in this. It says, another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. So there's a couple of interesting things on this one first. I mean, if we know of Simon Peter, some of the stories of him, he was always one to speak up. He was a man of action who would happily rush into any situation. And so here's his brother, and what does he do? He speaks up. You know, Jesus hasn't asked him where we're going to buy all this bread for to feed people. He's obviously around. He can see the same crowds. He can see the same need. And he's not thinking, well, if we do this and we're going to need this much bread and this much, no, it's not going to work. He's not thinking that. He speaks up. And this is what he says. Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many? So it's really interesting. See, he's not the polar opposite to Philip. I mean, Andrew doesn't actually have the food himself. He's somehow found this boy who does. But he clearly sees that, well, it's such a tiny amount. I mean, how could it possibly meet this need? But he hasn't discounted that. There's a small seed of faith. And I think this is where Andrew has been traveling with Jesus, seeing him do these miracles. There's a small seed of faith in there that thinks, I know this looks impossible. I know this might sound completely crazy, but there's something about Jesus that might just make this possible. And so I'm going to speak up. I'm going to bring someone else to Jesus who has something, even though it's tiny, because maybe there's just a chance that something could happen here. He clearly understands there's no way that we can feed these people on our own. But maybe, just maybe, there's a chance. There's a hope. I mean, maybe we might have a lunchbox with something like this. It's not mine, but it's pretty cool. So inside, it's funny that these haven't been eaten by everyone else yet at home, but I'm rather partial to a mackerel, smoked mackerel. But they probably would have been smaller fish than these, probably the size of small sardines. And I've just got 2 rolls. But here's 5 small barley loaves. There's quite an interesting mention of the detail about them being barley loaves, because that would have told the readers at the time, and when we look into it, that actually the barley loaves would have meant this boy was extremely poor, because barley loaves was only the things that people who had literally nothing else could make. Now, we don't know if this was his whole meal for the day. We don't know those details. But that boy, he brought what he had, and for him was probably everything. And yet we might look at this little boy, tiny lunchbox. I mean, there's no point even trying, is there? I mean, we would call that something like a drop in the ocean, wouldn't we? We'd look at that and think, I mean, even amongst the people gathered here today, this isn't going to go very far. We might stretch a few crumbs each, but it's barely going to feed us, is it? Imagine looking out across thousands of people. I mean, it records 5,000, but we know that was just the number of men, because that's how they were counted at the time. So add on however many numbers of women and children, could easily be double or triple the number of people there. I mean, Andrew, it's great to have the idea, but really, surely that's not going to do it. But you know what? Jesus isn't looking for a human solution. He's looking for human offerings. That's what he wants to bring. And he's showing us in this story, the boy has brought what seems tiny to our human calculations and our logical deductions and our spreadsheets and our calculations. It looks to be far too insufficient. But Jesus isn't looking to them to answer this. How are we going to do it? He wants us to understand who's going to do it. And what he's pleased with is the offering, because then he can do something with that. And that's what we find out next in the story. So Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. I mean, this is crazy. I mean, how did this manifest? We don't know. Did it suddenly explode into a huge amount, or we just don't know how that actually happened. But what Jesus is showing us is, as tradition would be, that the father of the household would be the one breaking the bread and giving thanks. And so it's a picture to us of Jesus as the Father and the people gathered as his family. And as he does that, he takes what seems like such a small offering, and he's grateful for it. He's giving thanks for it. He's not saying this is insufficient, this is too little. Why did you even bother bringing this person here? There's no way that's going to happen. There's no way it can work. He gives thanks. Because again, he's not looking for the solution from us. He wants us to bring our offering, because it is God who can do the miracle. And he's trying to teach to his disciples, his close followers, and the people there, look, I want you to trust me. You don't need to understand how we're going to solve this problem. Trust me. Don't we need that in our lives? When we face real challenges that we can't figure out how on earth there's a way through this, Jesus is saying, trust me first before you can understand. And it's not all about trust. There is understanding to be found and to be sought. But Jesus calls us to follow him. We have to trust first. So he takes this kind of ridiculous offering in the context. He blesses it. He gives thanks for it. I like the bit where he says he only gave it to those who were seated. Not sitting down, not getting food. There was manners at their table that day. I like that. As much as they wanted. It talks about people being replete. Philip's original vision was, we can't even give them a bite to eat. Jesus isn't looking just to meet the minimal need, just to whet our appetite or give people a few crumbs to live off. The bread and the food that he wants to provide brings full satisfaction. It is fulfilling. It does not leave us wanting for anything more. And I think about in our culture today, where we've seen the disintegration of so many family units, perhaps a disillusionment within institutions, whether that's in politics and politicians in the way they behaved, whether it's historical abuses of celebrity figures. I mean, who does it leave us being able to trust in? It leaves us with this suspicion of anyone in any kind of profile or authority. And actually it starts to condition us that only people we can rely on as ourselves. That somehow we need to live being self-sufficient. That really we should trust nobody. But let's not be blinded by that or led into that, because trusting nobody is a one-way path to absolute loneliness. So Jesus is teaching his disciples, and through what John's recorded for us to learn as well, let's trust first in the bigness of God. And that when he calls us into that mission, it's always going to be something bigger than we can realize how on earth we're ever going to solve this. Because he wants us to trust in him. Trust that he will be the one to take our offering, however big or small we think it is, and do something far greater, in fact, beyond our imagination. So let's see how this story starts to come to a conclusion. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. I mean, how have we gone from this moment of literally thousands of people in this park, initially with nothing to feed them with, only a small boy's lunchbox, to everyone having enough to eat, that there's now baskets upon baskets full of extra left over. The difference is that one person brought their offering and Jesus did something amazing with it. And that's all he's asking of us. Not that we are the ones able to achieve that massive thing without him. but bring our small offering. Not to look down on it, not to think that there's no way this could make a difference. Bring what we have. And we don't need to compare our offering to someone else's. Bring what we have. Because in the scale of this story, I mean, what's the real difference between 5 loaves and 2 fishes and a giant hamper when you've got 15,000 people need feeding? There's no difference. They're both tiny. They're both insignificant offerings. And there's plenty more we could go into in this story around the 12 baskets and how what was left over was very traditional, that there would always be things left over for the servants. I mean, there's lots more we could dig into here, but we really just want to pull out some of the key points for us in our faith to inspire us and moments of hope. So let's have a look at the 3 characters. Maybe you find you might identify with one or more of them. I mean, we've got Philip, as we said. He's the logistics guy. He's working it out. How can we make this happen? And actually, I think there's a place for him. His logistics and coordination is not a bad thing. It's not about a lack of faith. We need people who can organize, who can make stuff happen. And although it doesn't record it in the story, feeding that many number of people, I'm sure there was logistics and coordination involved in there. I'm sure he was involved in making sure everyone got some and that it was tidied up properly and it was well organized. But the problem was that was as far as he could see. He had these skills to do these things, but that was his limitation. He needed to look beyond that and to trust that when he gets to those limits of what he can do, God always calls us to more than that. And he needs to learn to trust and expect that Jesus is going to take what he can do and do something even greater. So maybe you might feel similar to Philip. Or what about our friend Andrew? The one who said, I don't have anything, but let's see what we've got around us. This boy, he's got something small. I mean, I don't think it can make a difference, but there was just enough hope. There was just enough of a seed of faith and trust in Jesus that he brought this boy to him. Maybe that's where you feel similar. And be encouraged that that's all we need is that tiny seed of faith to think, I'm just going to pray that prayer in that situation. I mean, it seems terrible. It seems hopeless, whatever it may be in a friend or family or a neighbor, someone at work, someone at school. It just seems way beyond my capacity to help, but maybe Jesus can do something there through me. Andrew, he was the one who introduced the boy to Jesus. And without that, maybe there'd have been no miracle. We don't know. Maybe he would have found another way. Andrew didn't know how it would work out, but he had enough trust in the who would work it out. Encourage us in our lives. Sometimes we don't know how. Sometimes we're not going to know how. We need to place our trust in the who, in Jesus, who's going to make that difference. You never know what will come out of bringing someone else to Jesus, right? Andrew didn't know that. He brought this boy with his tiny lunch. When we introduce someone to Jesus, we don't know what Jesus can do with that life, with the gifts inside that person. And then not to be forgotten is the little boy. I mean, maybe very poor, we don't know much about him. Clearly, he was willing to give up what he had. And I don't think it's a stretch of the imagination to think This meant a lot to him. Sometimes that's what Jesus calls us to do, to surrender that which we feel is very important to us. But was he left wanting? I suspect not. I mean, not only did he give up his lunch, for which I'm sure, as we read, everyone was filled to more than plenty, but he had the moment and the opportunity to participate in something amazing, something I'm sure that he would remember for the rest of his life. Isn't that worth it, to bring our offering, to surrender to Jesus what we might hold dear? Not that we might gain back, but I don't believe Jesus will leave us in any debt, but that we can participate, we can be part of something which feeds so many more people. We don't need to look at the need and count ourselves out. We should always count ourselves in. And I love this quote I read, which says, "Little is always much in the hands of Christ." Little. I mean, you might feel small. You might feel you've got not a lot to bring. It's the crazy way of the kingdom of God. The smallest things can be the greatest things in the hands of Christ. So as we draw to a close, I want to encourage you and challenge you and provoke you to think about those three characters in the story. Whether you can relate to maybe different bits of each of them. But let's be people who bring what we have, bring our offering. When we see a need, let's not think, it's just not possible. But even if we do feel that, let us find the faith that Andrew found. Just maybe, there's a chance that Jesus could make a difference here. And let's be like that boy, that we're willing to bring our offering, surrender it to Jesus, in the trust and the hope that we can participate in his mission, in seeing lives changed from our sacrifice, not worrying about what we're going to lose or how we're going to be fed, trusting in him first. As we go into this summer series, just invite you to continue to journey with us as we think about the faith that Jesus calls us to. Let's close our eyes for a moment as I pray, and we'll draw to a close. Heavenly Father, thank you that first of all you call us, but thank you that you call us to something way bigger than really we can do anything about. And thank you for this story with these different characters in. They're all loved and treasured by you. And whoever we feel we might relate to, help us to be obedient and faithful in bringing our offering, bringing that which has been actually given to us, surrendering it to you, that we may have the joy of participating in something incredible, in seeing hungry people fed. Thank you that you call us to that. Help us to find that small seed of faith. Just possibly, just maybe, Jesus can make a difference here. Let that be enough to move us into action over this summer period. We thank you for our time together this morning. We pray you'd continue to challenge us and stir us and move us as we journey through these next few weeks of these stories of you out on the road. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, thanks very much. We're really looking forward to this summer series, and James is going to be sharing with us next Sunday, so I really invite you to come and join us then. We have a few minutes now. Make sure you got one of those cards with all the information about our summer activities. If you've got children over the road, please do go at 12 to collect them, but enjoy a few minutes now, get another refreshment, and have a great week, and we look forward to seeing you again next Sunday.
Bum bum bum